processes are not the enemy of innovation. Ambiguity is.
Welcome to the Team Amplifier Podcast. I'm your host, Byron Summerdahl. Here you'll be inspired by industry leaders who build flourishing tech teams. Stay tuned and prepare to be amplified.
3, 2, 1.
Today we're talking about creating invisible structures that help to automate flourishing, automate team flourishing, automate autonomy, and automate psychological safety. And I just can't wait for you to get into this episode. But before we do, I want to introduce our guest, who is Randall Noval. Did I get your last name right, by the way?
Close enough. Noval. Yep.
Noble. Okay. So I go straight for like Spanish pronunciations whenever I don't know how to pronounce something, there's a whole story behind why I do that. But anyway, Randall is a tech leader who is passionate about creating these intentional, invisible structures that help teams to flourish. And so he's just the right person to be a part of this conversation. So Randall, help us to know a little bit more about you. Where are you at these days? What are you doing?
Sure. Well, great to meet everyone and be here and talk about this topic. I think this is such an important topic that is very difficult to navigate if you don't have some guidance or some direction. So my background is I've been leading product and engineering teams across a variety of industries, from the ad agency world, so definitely Mad Men, actually worked at an agency on Madison Avenue in New York for a while, through to healthcare, federally funded healthcare at BCBSA, digital coupon companies, and healthcare, telehealth companies as well. And across all of those, I worked with small teams, big teams. I worked in a variety of different areas. And one of the things that I see is consistent is, unless you're intentional about defining how work gets done across teams, between stakeholders, et cetera, things will not evolve in the way that is optimal for the business, not optimal for individuals or for teams in terms of how they deliver value. And so that's really what I want to talk about today, is some of the things that I learned over time about the value of intentional process creation and process design.
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about the Wild West, and which is kind of what you'd end up with in your team if you don't set up some of these systems that help to provide guidance and direction. And I thought about a train going out towards the Wild West. If it doesn't have tracks, it'll take a lot longer to get there. And it might get there. Work. I don't know how, but yeah. I mean, those big metal wheels trying to spin against just dirt and gravel, it might get there eventually, but it would take a really, really long time. Might not ever actually arrive. And so, like, combining all of that, I just have this imagery of us trying to, I don't know. I have the imagery keeps on going like that. Now I just thought of like trying to bathe cats or herd cats, and which is even worse than Wild West. But yeah, we need to talk about this today, because we don't want to be herding cats. We don't want to be dealing with a Wild West situation in our own teams. We want order, but we also want safety for everybody that's on the team. We want them to flourish as the team and the company around them flourishes. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. So Randall, what's a book that you've been reading lately that has made an impact on you?
The book that I really like is called Team Topologies, and it talks about different team types, and this is all engineering teams, different team types and different types of interactions between those teams. And one of the things that I think is really powerful about it is when you define those interactions and you can align the different teams to the different types of interactions, you're setting expectations about what they should do, how they should interact, and what their engagement should be. And that becomes just very powerful in creating consistency across teams and across culture for the organization. And with that consistency, you can optimize, you can accelerate the work that can be automated. You can also spend more time on the things that matter. Process here is not meant to be a micromanagement approach. This is not how we get our fingers in and control every aspect. Intentional process design, it really helps enable autonomy by setting expectations and boundaries around how teams should interact. So the Team Topologies book by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais, I think is just a phenomenal book there.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. Something else that's in the show notes is your LinkedIn profile. So if people are already looking at your LinkedIn profile, they may be saying, well, okay, this Randall guy is kind of out of my league, is kind of like a superhuman tech leader. And I want to make sure that everybody realizes just how human you are. And we're humanizing tech leadership. We want to humanize our guests at the same time. So Randall, I'm sure you've got something in your back pocket, a little story just to help us realize how human you are. What's a story about a really embarrassing mistake that you made? Like, make it juicy, make it a good juicy one. A mistake you've made as a tech leader.
As a tech leader, I definitely have made a lot of mistakes, and I think making mistakes is one of the best ways to learn. This too shall pass, and learning how to learn from your mistakes is so important. Only reason I know a lot is because I've screwed up a lot. I'll take a step back. And one of my big soapboxes for a long time has been knowledge management and documentation, and making sure that we have documentation and that we have it all out there for us to reference. And I know that everyone has felt the pain of not having the right documentation, not having it available. And so for a long time, I really just stood up on my soapbox and pounded the table. I really wanted everyone to document all the things that they could, because that was so important, and we could use search or other things to help us find the right stuff later. Unfortunately, what I hadn't considered is kind of the human aspect. One of the outcomes of having well-structured, well-organized documentation, but I had actually created an anti-pattern here by just creating noise that by trying to solve it all at once, but without kind of understanding where the various pain points were. I created a lot of noise, and I got a lot of pushback from a lot of different folks at all levels, above me, my level, below me, where there's a lot of friction. And I wasn't helping people do their jobs better, which is what I was trying to do. Instead, I was just causing noise and chaos. And that's kind of the opposite of the intent. And so as a result of that, I learned how important it is to start small. I really consider the people cost, the soft cost of change, and just get something right that establishes a pattern that we can leverage and learn from as a practice, as a habit, and then build from there. So not solving all the knowledge management stuff and not creating the whole giant pattern of mapping of this is where stuff goes, whether it's code comments, readmes in GitHub, wikis or files, whatever. But instead just finding a thing that is small, that has a positive impact, and starting with that to build out the new habit of documentation. So a little bit of a story there of how I cause more problems than I solve by trying to solve a problem.
What were some of the complaints that you get from like the ICs on your team?
Why am I doing this? This doesn't make sense. That was a lot.
Who's ever going to read this?
People are never going to read this, 100%. There were a lot of things like, I don't want to write. I just want to write it. I just want to code. Right. A lot of folks, particularly in the technology side, where they are ICs, they don't quite grasp the value of learning how to communicate effectively. And so that can spin off into a different conversation of the value of writing well. Learning how to communicate well is so critical for growth as a leader. But in this case, it is very much of, this just feels like busy work. I don't want to do it. This doesn't help me get the stuff out the door that I need.
Yeah. Been there, done that on both sides. I'm with you. And I've also made a similar mistake, just like I needed something out of it, like the documentation, pushed it out on the team, and they pushed back. So thank goodness that our teams felt good enough to be able to push back on that.
Yeah.
So part of documentation is maybe our quest to establish processes that maybe having documentation helps to onboard new team members. If we don't have the documentation, then it really draws out that ramp up process for a new contributor. And so it's kind of like one thing leads to another. And we want to be intentional about how we set up these processes, and we want the processes themselves to be intentional. and well thought out, and something that the team is buying into. So what we're talking about today is how tech leaders can build teams that flourish by establishing intentional processes. So Randall, tell me about what we mean by establishing intentional process.
Sure. Intentional processes are designed systems that enable teams to work more effectively while reducing cognitive load. If you're trying to figure something out every time you do it, it's a lot of additional work that doesn't really add a lot of value. And so defining and designing a process that takes all of those learnings and puts it into the how work gets done aspect, you can reduce the cognitive load, which then frees up more capacity, more space for people to think through the things that they need to think through, solve the business challenges and problems that they have in front of them. And this is very different than what you'll often find in organizations with reactive processes, which have really just emerged from, a various crisis or, maybe there's an issue in production and now we have a new process to prevent that issue from ever happening again. Those reactive things are useful in a short term, but long term, they miss the intentionality that allows them to build on each other, to have a coordinated and cohesive approach to your thinking as a leader and how the teams understand how work gets done.
So give me some examples of what kinds of things might come from an intentional process. Like what kinds of processes are we talking about?
I think one of the critical ones, particularly as leaders and the higher up in the organization that you move, or the larger the scope of the organization you have that you're responsible for, is feedback. As leaders, we need that feedback because we don't necessarily have the direct, test-driven development approach where I'm running the test to define the behavior, I'm going to write the code, pass the test, and then I'm going to optimize. Because I get that feedback loop that's happening very quickly, almost real time. The higher up you go, the broader the scope as a leader, you lose out on some of that tangible day-to-day impact, and getting the feedback systems in place that allow you to capture that, whether that's surveys. You'll see developer experience surveys happening frequently. You can and should have touch points with your directs, the team leads meetings, or organizational meetings where it's not just you talking at people. There is a space to allow people to provide their own feedback and their thoughts. One of the things that I'll do with organizations is run a lean coffee. So lean coffee, if you're not aware, is an agendaless structured meeting where people can, in the first few minutes of the meeting, suggest topics anonymously that they want to discuss. Then people vote on which topics they're interested in discussing as a group. And then I, as a facilitator, will provide kind of the structure for the conversation, but I'm not injecting my own opinion in that. It's a space for the team, for everyone who's in that discussion, to come together and talk through it. And that is just such valuable feedback for me as a leader, not just because I get to understand what is going on within the team, but I also get to see how they interact. And that's just huge feedback. Other things are going to be, communication protocols. One of the things I always do is set up a ways of working. So we'll have a conversation in the beginning of an engagement, and we'll talk through, this is how we work together. And we talk about the things that we need individually, whether that's, I've got kids in the afternoon, I need to have some time off, or, I've got appointments in the morning that I need to make sure I'm available for. Whatever it is, if we set those expectations up front, that becomes a process. We just are working through it together.
Yeah, you can even include focus time, like builder versus manager time, and agree as a team, even with your supervisors, that, okay, these hours during the day, we're going to be spending this in focus time. We don't want meetings and interruptions. Yeah,
absolutely. I've had several teams who have taken on themselves to do that. Not even at my suggestion directly, but they felt that it was useful for them. And so Wednesdays and Fridays, the afternoons, are blocked on the calendars for focus time. It doesn't mean that they're not going to have meetings or discussions. It just means that those are for the team to get work on, the deep thinking that they need to do. And that's been incredibly powerful in helping the teams consistently deliver while respecting kind of the need for some of the larger organizational things that are outside of their control.
I hadn't heard of lean coffee before, and it's really cool. I'm actually going to include a link to this in the show notes so that people can check this out if they haven't heard of it yet too. Great format for a meeting. Almost kind of sounds like a bar camp almost.
Yeah, a little bit. I will, I'll send you as well a note for a free open source tool that I've used for tracking lean coffee topics. So you can do it virtually. It doesn't need to be in person.
So a couple of other examples where I think, and you can just tell me whether I'm tracking with you or not, but like definition of done, definition of ready, those seem like they fit into this idea of having like an intentional structure or process around even getting the work ready or deciding as a team when work is done.
Yep.
So we don't just throw around that sacred word flippantly, but we say, okay, this is done because it followed this process where it completed this checklist.
Yeah, definitions of ready and done are really great frameworks and tools. A definition of ready is, for a team, it's following Scrum, where you have a 2, 3, maybe 4 week cadence. Definition of ready is just the team saying, these are the things that we need in a story to be complete before we think it's going to be ready to accept it into the sprint. And definition of done is a similar thing on the other side, where the team says, these are the things that we feel are necessary for the work to be considered done, complete. Separating out some of the agile friction of definitions of ready and done. The notion here is that the team is responsible for setting expectations and creating that process. So it's not that I'm telling them you're going to have a definition of ready and done, and these are what it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's the team has found value in it, and it feels like they have the ability to control it and set those expectations with our product partners, with their design partners, their business stakeholders, so that everyone is aligned and aware of those expectations.
There's a phrase that really got baked into me in one of my previous companies. And I think I don't know whether Tommy Norman coined the phrase, probably didn't, but Tommy Norman was one of my previous mentors, coworkers, and a great guy. You should meet him if you haven't had a chance yet. But he used to talk about falling into the pit of success. And I also remember reading about guardrails from the Ruby on Rails crowd. Maybe it was DHH who posted about guardrails in their team. And I remember that was years ago that we were talking about guardrails, and that kind of seems like it falls into what we're shooting for here. We're trying to allow people to make decisions without making decisions that are out of bounds or that could kill the company or kill the team or kill themselves. And it's giving them the right materials to be able to do what they need to do and be autonomous, as autonomous as possible, but still give them the freedom to make decisions within those guardrails. And to me, this sounds like we are kind of automating autonomy and providing almost automatic psychological safety. I mean, as long as people are feeling like they've got the right level of autonomy.
Yeah,
what do you think?
So autonomy is a really important aspect of self-organizing teams that are empowered and enabled to go solve problems. And that's really, at least, what we're trying to do, so that we can focus on longer term, bigger picture things. We need teams that can take in the problems in the context that they're provided and go address them directly, independent of me having to tell them exactly how to solve that problem. So autonomy here is an important factor, and intentional process design allows us collaboratively to set expectations about how things are going to happen, so that we can focus on making those things happen rather than figuring it out every time or trying to navigate inconsistent approaches or expectations across different stakeholders.
Right. So it's clear that this has to do with human flourishing. It leads to human flourishing. But let's get really, really specific, because that's what this podcast is all about, is helping people to, helping team leaders or tech leaders to build teams that flourish. So what does establishing intentional processes have to do with human flourishing?
Well, I think we touched on a little bit. We have psychological safety, and with that is trust. Trust is absolutely a foundational element. You can't have autonomy and a command and control culture. Those are mutually exclusive. You cannot have self-organizing teams and teams that only do exactly what they're told and nothing else. Those are mutually exclusive directions. And so in terms of human flourishing, what intentional process creation does is it recognizes that we as leaders, we have a particular role that we play that is the longer term, the bigger picture, the strategy, the broader scope and context. And the people that we have in our teams and our organizations, we're working collectively so that they can go do the things that they are better at doing, that they are more focused on doing, and doing that in a way that allows them to provide feedback to us as leaders so that we understand where our gaps are, or where the problems of the process are, or that something comes up that's unexpected. We can work through that together rather than having it be a hiccup that people just absorb and internalize and feel negative about.
So if this is so good, if this is like the best thing since sliced bread, why aren't more leaders establishing intentional processes?
It's a good question, and I've spent time thinking about why. And what to think about is how much work it is. It is not a small amount of work on the individual leader. As a leader, you have to be self-aware and recognize where you have your strengths and your weaknesses and how your team complements you with that. There is also an aspect of, if you've been a leader for a while, they would call it the empathy gap, that you've gotten so used to doing things in a particular way that you forget what it feels like to someone who's new to that space, that you forget what the kind of lower levels of more junior folks who don't quite have the background and experience, or in my case, haven't made as many mistakes as I have, what it feels like for them to go through the process and struggle with, maybe this organization or business that you've been working in for 10, 15, 20 years. There's a lot of things in there as well about fear. There's a worry that, processes will limit creativity and innovation. And they can, there's no doubt about that, but that doesn't mean they have to. And there are so many different ways that people forget or aren't paying attention to this that, habit, that it's just not something we've ever paid attention to in the past. And so we didn't know that there was a thing that we needed to pay attention to moving forward.
Yeah. To an extent, like command and conquer. To an extent, command and control it seems easier.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's what seems to come natural. I don't know why that is, but it's just, I don't know. It just takes some extra brain cycles to think through and get to the point where you feel like you can trust your team to handle certain aspects and certain decisions. And yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. The trust your team is a really important. Your team has to trust you, and you have to trust your team to get the stuff done. And
see, I think that's the bigger hurdle
yes.
for leaders. Like, we don't necessarily trust our team, and so maybe that's why we want to give them something that's paint by numbers,
yep.
Or we want to just jump in and fight the fire ourselves, or maybe we have a little bit of a savior complex and we want to get in and be the guy that fixes everything.
Yeah. And those are all, I've experienced them. I've done those things. I've been on both sides of that. And what I can say is definitively thinking that you know it all is never, I am never as smart as me and you together, right? I am never as good as the two of us together. And so having that perspective and coming in with some humility and really working to ensure that we are together trying to drive value and deliver value is really a critical transition to help me remove myself and my own fears from my ability to get stuff out the door.
Now, we're not talking about like just copying and pasting somebody else's process. Like, you can't just read a book and be like, okay, I'm gonna implement this book in my own company. That's not the same thing as establishing intentional processes, right? Because you got to think through this stuff, and you might be able to take some inspiration from somebody else's process, or where you've done this before in another place, or just the latest book that you've been reading. But it's not the same. You've got to think through this.
You're right. And I think that's one of the big values of frameworks that is kind of the more nuanced thinking that I've seen is frameworks are phenomenal if you use them as they're intended, which is typically as a learning exercise, that you do the framework, you follow the framework as it's laid out, doing all of the stuff that it talks about. There's a lot of thinking, a lot of value that goes into all of the, 0 to 1, the onboarding, the change management, et cetera. Those frameworks are incredibly powerful if you follow them as they're designed. However, that doesn't mean you stay there. The value of the framework is not just in the framework, but how you leverage it and how you learn from it. Frameworks can be changed, but you have to go through the framework to understand where the framework works, where it does not, and why, so that you can design the processes on the other side that reflect the needs that you have, your unique needs as an organization. If you shortcut the framework, though, and you just try to jump to creating and designing your own processes without that learning aspect, then you never really get the value of what that framework represented, all of the days, months, weeks, years that went into defining it. And you're skipping ahead to something without understanding why. And, as you know, anyone who's written code, if you put something into production that behaves in a particular way and you haven't tested it, you don't know why it works. You also don't know why it breaks. And when it does break, you need to go back to the beginning, and that becomes a more difficult process because you're going back and kind of redefining work that's already been done.
Yeah. So let's just imagine that somebody out there is saying to themselves, okay, I want to jump on this bandwagon with Randall and Byron. I want to start establishing intentional processes in my own company, in my team, but they're new at this. Maybe they did just read a book. Maybe it was even the book that you recommended, and they're ready. They're just ready. What are they going to miss in the process? What are the blind spots they're going to have? What are they going to overlook?
So just like any other advanced skill set, it takes practice. You have to do it a couple of times. You're going to have to fail at that before you can learn really what works well and what doesn't and why. And so some of those things are going to be, people are impacted differently, whether they're introverts or extroverts, or, how they communicate, their communication style. The same process that may work very well for one group may not work very well from another group, talking about that copy and paste situation you mentioned before. There are, particularly if you've been a leader in an organization for a long time, there are unwritten rules, the cultural, the political aspects, where they often favor people who are very culturally similar to the leadership that has kind of grown up in that company, versus things that new people may not be aware of or understand or even be able to detect are present. Very, very importantly, there's a lot of emotional aspect to this. There's emotional labor required to navigate poorly designed processes. And that's not something that you can easily identify until you've gone through it and tried it and gotten that feedback as a leader from your team about what is working. We tried to do it this way. Why didn't that work? Well, it's because you, Randall, didn't do X, Y, Z, or you forgot about this, or this is just a lot of work and I didn't want to do it. Like, being able to get that feedback is useful. But I think most importantly is establishing psychological safety with your team as a leader is probably the most important aspect, as a foundational element of just about every highly productive team and organization. And it is critical for knowing where and how to define processes that work for the team.
Yeah. I mean, as you are building processes that help people to fall into the pit of success, you're just inevitably going to also create processes that throw people into the pit of failure, and maybe yourself as a tech leader. And I sometimes think about the baby that we create. We create these beautiful babies in our minds, these processes that we've created, the structure, and we send our team over there to play with our baby, and we're so excited, like a proud parent. And I think that it is hard to just like ask people if your baby's ugly, and it takes some maturity, it takes some courage. You're running a big risk here, asking people, how does your baby look? Mm-hmm. And inevitably they're going to tell you that, 5 different ways that your baby's ugly. And now you've got to suck it up. You got to go fix it. But that's just part of the process, right? I mean, we've got to, as we're setting people up for the pit of success, we've also got to accept that sometimes we're all going to fall into the pit of failure.
Yeah, we're definitely going to trip on it, fall into it. It's going to be a stumbling block for sure. The pit of success is very much the notion that we want to make the right way the easy way.
Yeah.
The problem is that's very difficult because there are so many things that can sideswipe us, that can come in from left field in terms of process or change. And the hard work is figuring out what is easy, what is going to make sense for our team and what we're trying to deliver. So making the right way the easy way, helping people fall into the pit of success, making it super easy to do it the way that is valuable, and actually adding friction and making it more difficult to do it the way that is contrary to what we've aligned on and agreed to is useful nuance from a leadership perspective.
As we're having this conversation, I'm just thinking about how many different illusions or illustrations have we tossed out now that we're talking about ugly babies and pipelines and pits and anyway, that's why these conversations are always fun, because we can try to figure out a new way to weave all these different things together.
Well, I think that's really important is that, attention process creation is one aspect of being an effective leader, and nothing works in isolation. So to me, it's great that we're finding all of these different analogies and metaphors and other ways of talking about it, because it's not a silo. It's not something that is independent and isolated. It is one factor of a number of factors that go into helping organizations deliver value. And I think that's a great observation.
Well, Randall, help us to bring this down from the clouds, and let's get really practical. So can you share a time when this really worked really well, or maybe didn't work out so well, just a time when establishing intentional processes led to unexpected results?
Sure. So I'll use a story here that hopefully many folks will resonate with. I worked with my teams to improve their plan versus actual from a sprint delivery perspective. You may have heard plan versus actual or predictability, which is basically in a Scrum team, how many stories, not story points, how many stories did you commit to for the sprint, and how many stories did you complete that sprint? Now, that's an important metric, and it's very simple. How many stories did you complete divided by how many stories you delivered, and it gives you a range or a percentage. What you want is somewhere between 90 and 110%. Either way is fine, of consistently being able to say, this is how many stories we're going to complete the sprint, and this is how many we actually do. The reason that's important is it sets an expectation with our product partners, with our business stakeholders, with our customers about when stuff will be ready. And that also means that the team has to have awareness and visibility as to what is causing them to be unpredictable. If they're consistently delivering half of what they commit to, well, there are some issues there, right? So some of those issues are going to be that the team is spending time defining work that doesn't actually get done. The team is spending time maybe navigating environment issues or their tech stack issues and their DevOps pipelines. Maybe it's that there are insufficient requirements. All of those things add up and cause friction. And so I work with my teams to include in their team level sprint retrospectives a discussion about what was causing their unpredictable aspects, whether they were too high or too low, and what they're going to do the following sprint to improve that. And it is kind of continuous improvement, continuous learning. It took a while. It took a while for the teams to create the safety that they needed to be able to feel comfortable speaking about the things that they're frustrated with or concerned about. It took a while for the managers to establish the rapport and communication channels that they needed, particularly with hybrid teams that are scattered around the world, where you have, not everyone's in the same office, but you have not even in the same continent or necessarily natively speaking the same language. And so it took time for these things to shake out, but because we were consistent in our approach, we are patient in the learning. What I was able to get is not only the teams were able to become more predictable, meaning more consistent when they say things are going to get done, they're actually getting those things done. One of the outcomes was the team actually had more space for the deep thinking. So that was really not the primary goal. The primary goal was making sure that we are consistently able to deliver the things that we say we're going to deliver. But by doing this and removing some of that friction from the process, the teams had more space to do the deep thinking, the deep research, explorations that they needed to feel better about the work that they're doing, and even learn some new technologies along the way. I even had one developer tell me that they felt for the first time that they could take the time to learn about a new approach or do a refactor of a messy section of the code and not feel guilty about it. Going back to the emotional aspect, the not feel guilty about doing this work that is valuable, but is not kind of getting the tickets done, was a space they hadn't had before. And so the intentional process here was to have the team leads work with the teams on sprint level retrospectives to identify what is causing their unpredictability, and address it.
This reminds me of something that I remember reading. I can't remember which book it was, but it was talking about creating slack time, and that's not talking about the tool Slack, but like creating space in somebody's day to be able to sit back and think through things, and how that can pay off in dividends, not just in the bottom line for your company. People can come up with new innovative ways to solve problems, maybe even new products, other things like that. But they also just feel like they have some room to breathe, and that produces a pretty nice effect in the human beings that you're working with. I mean, they just feel like they have space to move around, and it's not that they're being less productive. It's actually quite the opposite. They become more productive because of that flourishing that happens when you give people room to breathe and slack time in their day.
Well, absolutely. And that gives me, that's another area that I love to talk about, which is innovation. One of the things that I see as a gap in a leader's understanding of innovation is that innovation requires failure. Failure requires space. You can't be predictable. 100% predictable is 0% innovative. And so, to your point, 100% utilization for teams, for individuals, is the least efficient way to get stuff done, because there are lots of little hiccups, and all those little hiccups, if there's not slack in the process, there's not space between steps to absorb those variations, those statistical deviations, then it creates a traffic jam and everything kind of grinds to a halt. And I'm sure that you and many other folks listening to this have felt that, where it's just frustrating to get anything done. Everything feels like it's ground to a halt, and yet everyone is working as hard as they possibly can. Well, part of that is because there's not enough slack in the system. We haven't designed the processes to create the space to allow for failure, to allow for exploration, to allow for innovation to occur. And innovation is really just creative problem solving.
And working with technical debt is maybe another positive benefit to this. And there, again, it's a double-sided, or you're solving two problems with one solution. By providing more slack time, people may choose to invest that slack time in refactoring some code, fixing something, one of those dragons that they left in their code somewhere. And it not only does it allow the code to improve, maintainability improves, and which improves your product, but it also gives pride in their work to the person that was able to fix some of the things that they left behind, some of those Easter eggs that they hid under the rock. It makes them feel better about what they're building, and that helps them to flourish.
I love the idea of calling outdated code, developer Easter eggs. Surprise!
Yet another analogy to add into the list of we got ugly babies and Easter eggs and dragons,
especially when it's code that you wrote previously, and you look at your code. I wrote this 6 months ago, and I have no idea what I was thinking when I wrote this, but clearly this is wrong, right? So yeah, all of that. The notion that you can create space for yourself by intentionally designing some processes, people like to go back and clean up the work. People have pride in the work that they've done, and providing space for them to do that stuff that makes them feel that they feel is useful and valuable, aligned with the mission or vision that you have, is just so powerful.
So Randall, if there's one thing that tech leaders should do tomorrow to start promoting or to continue or improve their team flourishing, what would it be?
Well, first is going to be talk to the team. But what I would suggest is, assuming you've established some psychological safety and the team feels comfortable providing you feedback, is talk to them and say, what is one, not all, what is one source of unpredictability in your work? Is it shifted priorities? Is it unclear requirements? Do we have surprise dependencies? Whatever it is, work with the team to find those sources of unpredictability, and then work with the team to create a process to address it. Now, if it's an external factor, you may have to adjust how you interact with other teams, with other stakeholders. If it's an internal factor, maybe something the team has direct control over. That may just be a change to how the team organizes itself. Whatever it is, have a conversation and pick one thing to work with, to learn from, to make a change, see how it impacts stuff, and then iterate. Did that have the impact it meant to, you wanted it to, or did it not? And if it didn't, great. That's a learning that you can use to improve the next time you go through that and say, all right, that didn't work. We're going to try this other way now.
So, Randall, what about the other teams that are not your own? Like, how does this impact them?
So, intentional process design has a bit of a benefit that is kind of separate from how your team is going to, or your teams are going to appreciate it, by establishing better expectations, by clarifying expectations from other teams, whether that's other development teams, whether that's marketing or sales or business, product, customer support. There are lots of other teams that, stakeholders that you're going to interact with, and establishing intentional processes here do a couple of things. One is it provides some consistency and clarity for those other teams who are not, always in your world or have all the context you're working with. It also reduces some of the confusion for solving problems. But very importantly, it helps you and the other teams become more innovative. The processes are not the enemy of innovation. Ambiguity is. So the inconsistency about how things get done, about how the fundamentals work, is what causes innovation to struggle, because people are just constantly refiguring out how to work rather than following a process that you and everyone created to solve this problem so that you can spend more of your creative energy solving real business challenges.
Awesome.
This has been another episode of the Team Amplifier podcast. Thanks for joining us. Now, get out there and be a team amplifier.
And putting this into motion. So I hope everybody else in the audience will do that as well. Take the advice that Randall has laid out here and start being intentional about the processes that you put into place that help people to flourish through autonomy and psychological safety. And, well, you just go back and listen to the episode. It's great. If you're just now tuning in. So how can people get in touch with you and connect with you, Randall?
Well, as you mentioned, LinkedIn is always a great option. And you don't have to take my word for it. One of the things that I put on LinkedIn is recommendations. So you can see other people who have worked with me and what their feedback is. You can also reach me at starfish.net. Starfish with a Y. STARFYSH.net. And you would love to hear from you. Always happy to chat and learn more about what you're focusing on, what your frictions are, and how I can potentially help you.
Awesome. All right. See you next time.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Team Amplifier podcast. Thanks for joining us. Now, get out there and be a team amplifier.